Hey y'all, it's Lara here with your weekly Witchy Wednesday astrology report, this time for the week of November 21st to 27th, 2018. Wow, end of November already. How'd that happen, right? Um, I don't know about you, but I was just saying on Facebook yesterday how I'm really kind of not in the holiday mode just yet. And that's been happening to me over the last quite a few years now where I get a little overwhelmed at this time of year, and I know a lot of people do, and it just becomes all too much, right? With the demands and the pressures and the baggage and the dynamics and the demands. I think I said demands already, but you know what I mean. So um I've been trying to really be okay with that and to just take it one step at a time, to be mindful and in the moment. And sure, there are those, I know that there will be good times had, there'll be happiness, there'll be all of that, there'll be moments of joy, and it'll all be fine in the end. But there's a lot of pressure, right, at this time of year. And also we tend to, in our culture, for those of you who celebrate the holidays, we want to push it. We want to just, like every year, it's like the Christmas decorations come out a little earlier, and you know, which I know a lot of people are really into it. I used to be really into it actually, and I just have a different relationship with holidays now than I used to. But it's just that I guess what I'm trying to say is that when we are really paying attention to the natural rhythms, we we may be less inclined to force ourselves to embrace what we're not quite ready to embrace. So, for example, you know, the sun only officially moves into Sagittarius tomorrow, which is Thursday, the 22nd. Happy birthday, Sag sun signs. And, that is sort of the beginning of that holiday feeling, right? That holiday energy. Up until now, we've still been in Scorpio season, right? In the depths. And so there has been that need for some, inner kind of reflection and really maybe more sort of intimate connections and quiet and that kind of thing. And then when the sun moves into Sag, that's kind of our cue to go, all right, it's maybe now it's time to celebrate a little more, to get out there a little more, right? And I'm gonna talk about that in more detail in a second here. But so if you're not feeling it quite yet, give yourself permission to just say it's not where I'm at yet, and do what you can. It's hard not to cave to the pressures at this time of year. And sometimes if we force ourselves, it ends up turning out okay, and we just had to kind of get over ourselves, and that's okay too. But however you handle it, just do that with some compassion, right? Some empathy for yourself. Of course, also for others, but we often forget ourselves in that equation. So, take good care at this time of year. So the big news this week, I guess, is the full moon that's happening in Gemini on late Thursday night, early Friday morning, depending where you are in the world. And I'm going to talk largely about that in this video. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to go through all of the signs and speak to where this full moon is happening for you in your chart. And before I do that, though, I want to say a little bit more about the sun entering Sag, and a little bit more about well, something about Neptune turning direct, which I haven't mentioned yet, which is also happening this week. And then, the details about the full moon kind of thing. So the moon right now is in Taurus, and it's going to shift into Gemini late Thursday night, early Friday morning kind of thing. And the sun is going to move from Scorpio into Sagittarius around that same time, right? And so we'll have the full moon, because the full moon is always when the sun and the moon are opposite each other in the sky. And, and Sag and Gemini are are opposite each other in the chart, right? So that's marking the full moon. So when the sun moves into Sag, I already sort of mentioned to you, it's a time of a little bit more getting out and about and socializing, being a little more optimistic, a little having more faith kind of thing. Things are shifting from the inner world, Scorpio, to the outer world, right? From the depths to the heights or the breadths, right? Sagittarius is, oh, my heat just kicked off, thankfully, because it was on there for a bit. Hopefully that wasn't too noisy. But Sagittarius is about the big picture. It's about expanding our horizons. And so this is kind of that phase that we're moving into right now with the sun in Sag until December 21st. And so, it makes sense. It's the holiday parties start, the socializing starts, the laughter, hopefully. That's the idea anyways. I know it's not, as I said off the top, it's not that way for everybody. And so perhaps if that's where you're at, then you try to sort of embrace the faith that Sagittarius can have, that everything will, work out kind of thing. So on the shadow side of Sagittarius, we can tend to be a little over the top. Sag can kind of take things too far, like really sort of overreaching, overspending holiday season, overindulging, right? Just overdoing it in general. And also there can be a tendency to sort of push our worldview or our beliefs, our philosophies, that's all Sag related stuff, onto others, right? And so just be mindful of the potential for that to happen. But in general, Sag is associated with the merriment of the holidays, right? And the having faith and the warm fuzzy feelings kind of thing. So hopefully, as the sun establishes itself in Sag, then more of us will feel that energy coming into our awareness. I was going to talk about the full moon, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about Neptune direct first, which actually isn't happening until Saturday. But because I want to spend the majority of time talking about the full moon, I'll talk about this piece first. So Neptune has been retrograde, oh gosh, for a while. I can't even remember when it went retrograde, but it's retrograde about 40% of the year, right? So it's not like about 40% of the time. This is not an unusual event. And because of that, and because Neptune is an outer planet and it moves quite slowly, we tend not to notice, the retrogrades as much kind of thing. Not like we notice a Mercury retrograde, which we're currently in, which I spoke to in last week's video. If you didn't get a chance to watch it, you might want to go back and have a listen. And I'm going to talk about how the Mercury retrograde plays into the full moon here. But right now we're on Neptune, and so the thing is, like I said, you don't tend to notice it in your immediate awareness so much, but what you do notice is right around those periods when it will station, which just means it's kind of stopping to pivot and move directions, right? At least from our perspective on Earth. And so that's happening right around this time. Saturday, it officially goes direct, Saturday the 24th. But so right around now, we may be sensing this shift kind of about to happen. It's amplified. And the thing about Neptune, when Neptune goes retrograde, the energy, right, when any planet goes retrograde, the energy of that planet tends to move inward. And it's interesting with Neptune because when that energy moves inward, when Neptune's in retrograde, it's actually a time of becoming sort of more of taking off the rose-colored glasses. Let's put it that way. You know, where we kind of notice, you know, the harsh realities of life a little bit more, and we may not be so connected to our spirituality or our higher power or whatever you want to call it, right? And so when Neptune is moving direct, it's a nice time of year for this to happen too, right? We can start to feel a little bit more Mercury retrograde. I'm having a hard time finding my words. A little bit more ease and flow and that kind of thing. And things can look a little, you know, Neptune sort of puts the veil over things, right? And so things can look a little nicer. It tends to cover up the ugly spots. It's like hanging a picture over a hole in the wall so you don't have to look at it, right? We know the hole's still there, but we get to look at the picture that's hanging there instead. And so when Neptune goes direct, it can kind of be more like that, right? So things look a little nicer, a little friendlier, a little less prickly. It's like putting up the Christmas lights at this time of year, right? And so this can have a bit of a calming influence for us right now, which, you know, I think is something that we all kind of need. It can put some distance between us and our fears too for a little while, and those realities that we might not be ready to fully face just yet, right? We're going to put that on the back burner for a little while and, you know, sort of feel the magic coming back in, right? Oftentimes the holiday season, you know, you hear phrases like the magic of Christmas, and so Neptune direct can kind of have that bit of a flavor to it. Just remember, Neptune can also be associated with our just escapism and delusion and getting lost in the fantasy and not seeing things. It's like completely losing sight of the fact that there's a hole in the wall behind the picture, right? So, you know, just be mindful not to fool yourself into thinking that, you know, if you ignore the problem, it will go away, because that's never the case, right? It's also good to be mindful of not allowing yourself to be taken advantage of, you know, for your empathy and compassion and that kind of thing. You know, not trusting the wrong people, or getting caught up in the wrong situations, right? Or too caught up in our fantasies kind of thing. Or giving in to escapism to the point of it being unhealthy and, you know, it clouding our vision and our perception. It's a really good time right around, you know, Neptune going direct, when that energy is amplified, to examine our relationship to the flow of life, right? Are we allowing ourselves to be caught up in the stormy seas, or are we resisting the flow? You know, and optimally, what we want to do is be able to kind of strike a balance there. You know, not be forcing things, not be trying to swim upstream, but also not completely losing ourselves to the turbulence, you know? Okay, so that's Neptune direct, and the rest of the video I'm going to talk to you about the full moon in Gemini. And before I get into the real nuts and bolts of that, I want to talk to you, or I want to show you the chart rather. So this is the chart that I drew up for the full moon in Gemini, which in my area is happening just after midnight, between 12 and 1 a.m. on Thursday, so into Friday, right? And this is Eastern Standard Time. And so here's what the chart looks like. And here we have the sun that has just moved into Sagittarius, right? At 0 degrees. This is significant. I'm going to speak to it in a minute. And it is, they're conjuncting Jupiter in Sag, so right beside Jupiter in Sag. And there's Mercury in Sag as well, right? And you can see these red lines going across the chart because it's in opposition to this moon, which will be full at 0 degrees of Gemini. And then we see there's Mars up here in Pisces. And this full moon is making what we call a T-square. So Mars is squaring both the sun and Jupiter and the moon in Gemini here, right? So sun and Jupiter in Sag, moon in Gemini, Mars in Pisces, it's making this square. And that, as you've heard me say before, is a conversation of tension. And so we need to be mindful of that around this time. And I'm going to explain to you why that is in a minute. You know, and I think really for the sake of this, well, here's Neptune. I'll just show you Neptune, which is going to go direct on Saturday too in Pisces there. And probably, you know, like if you have planets or points around the sort of 15-degree mark, give or take, of Pisces, you'll feel that energy of Neptune probably a little bit more than some. But that's the chart. So that's all I'm going to speak to on the chart, because those are the significant things that I want to talk about here. There's a lot of mutable energy associated with this chart because there's a lot of planets in mutable signs, right? A lot of planets in Sagittarius. The full moon is happening in Gemini, a mutable sign. The Neptune thing is in Pisces, along with Chiron is in Pisces, and Mars is in Pisces as well. Pisces is another mutable sign, right? And the only thing that we don't have a lot of activity going on in right now is Virgo, but you know, Virgo is the other mutable sign, and it's opposite Pisces, so it factors in here as well. So there's a lot of mutable energy associated with this full moon, and that I want you to keep that in mind, because it's the energy, mutable energy is the energy of adaptability, changeability, going with the flow. You know, it has the qualities of kind of water, right? And so we kind of want to be aware of that, you know, not only harness that ability to go with the flow and be adaptable and changeable, but not to the extreme, right? But to also realize that if things get a little tense for us around the full moon, this too shall pass, right? It's not fixed energy where things are stagnant and stubborn. It's changeable energy. So, I see the theme of this full moon as being related to our stories and the stories we tell ourselves and the stories that we're living out. And because Gemini is an air sign, it's about the mind, and about information and our thoughts. And Gemini is a storyteller. Gemini is a wordsmith. Gemini can be a gossip too, right? Like to talk, 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 talk. And this is all related to the full moon, obviously, as it's in the sign of Gemini, right? But it's like because it's at 0 degrees. I'm sorry, I'm struggling with my words. Really, I'm having a difficult time with that, with this Mercury retrograde. Lots of stuff going on up here. All neurons are firing, but it's having a hard time coming out the talking hole here. So anyway, you know, because the full moon is at 0 degrees, in astrology, 0 degrees is like, it's called the critical degree, right? Because it's the very beginning of the sign. So it's a new start. It's like associated with like the Fool card in the tarot, if you know anything about that. It's where we have the opportunity to begin a whole, not only a whole new chapter, but like a whole new book, right? So it's like we are closing the book that we've just read or written, the story that we've just told, and we are beginning a whole new one. And some of us have been in that old story for a really, 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 really long time. Maybe even before this lifetime, right? And eventually, though, you know, every book has an ending, right? And so, like, even the Harry Potter series eventually came to an end 7 books later. But, you know, but eventually it did. There was an ending. And then on to new things, right? J.K. Rowling was on to new things. And so, you know, using that analogy, this is where we're at right now. In particularly, Gemini matters, and wherever Gemini sits in our chart. So whatever area of life Gemini falls for us and this full moon is happening for us is really our opportunity to close the book, finish that story, and move on to a new book, right? So that's kind of what's happening with this full moon. I showed you the chart, and I showed you that the full moon is making a square to Mars, which is in Pisces right now, right? And the Sun and Jupiter, which are conjunct each other, beside each other, in Sagittarius at the time of the full moon, are also making a square to Mars in Pisces. And so in my notes here, I wrote patience, grasshopper, right? Because that's really what's going to be required of us, is patience. Because this energy can kind of have us exploding or imploding, depending on how it plays out for us and how we choose to respond and deal, right? And granted, some people, depending on your personal placements, will feel this a little more than others, but we're all going to be triggered, which is a word I'm going to use probably a lot more in this the rest of this report. We're all going to be triggered in some area. And so feelings of emotional sort of anger can bubble up right now, right? And if we repress that anger, or especially if that anger has been repressed for some time, it can really come blowing out like a geyser right now. But if we choose to continue repressing it, it may manifest as physical symptoms, right? So in the body, discomfort, a feeling of heaviness, even depression, or mental franticness or irritability, or anxiety, right? So it's really important to notice your triggers right now. That's something that I was just having a conversation with a friend about this the other day, how I am becoming hyper aware of my triggers. And the Mercury retrograde, because that mental energy is being turned inward, right, at Mercury retrograde, I'm becoming really, really aware of my inner dialogue. I mentioned that on Facebook yesterday too. And, you know, really aware of my triggers. And so it's a good time to notice what triggers you. And rather than immediately responding or reacting or blowing or imploding on yourself, or being nasty to yourself for being triggered, try to examine those triggers with a sense of curiosity and compassion and patience, right? Like I said, try to discharge any of that pent up energy or anger or frustration that you're feeling in healthy ways, right? So, I mean, you know the drill. Physical activity, and that doesn't mean you have to go run a marathon. Just move your body. Get a massage. I should be taking my own advice as far as that goes right now, but that kind of thing, go on a mad house cleaning, pre-holiday house cleaning spree. Write it out, scream into the pillow, go to kickboxing. Like there's whatever you choose to do, but get that pent up energy out in a healthy way, not in a risky way, right? It's not a time for risky physical feats or anything like that. So, and if someone else attacks you, try not to react. Try not to take it personally. Easier said than done, I know. But when we have the awareness, we have a better chance of stopping ourselves. And that's not to say, like, if you need to defend yourself, by all means do, but don't pick a fight at this time, right? And always when there is a full moon, there is a call for balance. So, because the sun and moon are opposite each other in the sky, so it's about balancing these two polarities, right? Gemini is, as I mentioned, it's about the details. It's the wordsmith. It's the storyteller, right? And it's about the facts and rational thought, whereas Sag is more about the big picture, and it's about our ideas and our intuition, which is something I really want you to pay attention to around now. And so it's a time for balancing these two things, right? Don't believe everything that's going on up here. If you get too caught up in your head, try to drop down into your gut, into your heart, and sense what those messages are. But really, we're at ground zero here with this full moon at 0 degrees Gemini, particularly in whatever area of our lives, when we're talking about this on a personal level, that Gemini sits for us. And I'm going to get to that in just a minute. We're preparing to launch in something new in that area of life. But before we can do that, we have to close the book, right? The old book. We have to finish the old story. And so if these triggers come up for us right around the time of the full moon, it's because it's trying to get our attention. It's trying to say, is this really, you want to keep writing this story? Like, haven't we been down this road before? Take a look here and be willing to close the book. Be willing to let go of the old story, and consider new ways of thinking about it, right? So I think that's all in terms of the overall picture that I want to talk to you about. And then I'll spend the rest of the forecast here going through each of the signs and talking about this full moon in Gemini, and where we're being encouraged, right, to let go of that old story, to close the book on that, and to begin anew. So I'm going to start with Gemini. And Gemini, this is happening obviously for you. This is your full moon, right? And so it's happening for you in the first house, which is the house of self. So there is some like all full moons, it's a time of culmination. It's a time of coming to fruition. It's a time of realization and awareness, you know. And in your case, this is all about you. It's about your physical self, your vitality, um, your relationship to your physical being, how you approach the world, and how the world perceives you. So, you know, there's a story that's been playing out for you, Gemini, for however long, and now this full moon at 0 degrees is saying to you, it's time for a reset here, right? It's time to maybe it's the self-talk in your case, the internal dialogue that goes on about these things, that it's an outworn story and it needs to be put to bed, and you need to and when you now have the opportunity to start writing a new story in that department, right? In terms of your relationship to yourself, your your way of approaching the world, or how others perceive you. Your physicality, like I said, your physical appearance, your vitality as well. And so, big opportunity here, Gemini. And I encourage you to just really be mindful of that overall message, right? And watch the triggers and be curious, and compassionate as far as that goes. All right, moving on to Cancer. Cancer, this is happening in your 12th house. And so this is the house of the subconscious and the unconscious, that which is hidden, that which is hidden from ourselves. Sometimes this is things that other people notice about us that we don't notice ourselves. Or it can be just things that we have really buried in our unconscious. It also has to do with how we spend time alone, right? And that need for solitude. It has to do with our spiritual connection as well. So, what's coming up for you as far as these things go, Cancer? Are you being triggered in some way? How's your story changing in this life area? Perhaps. How is it ready? Are you feeling ready for a change, or are you clinging, as Cancers can sometimes do, right? To an old story, and not willing to let it go. And it's really time now, to embrace a new story as far as that goes. That 12th house area, all those things that I just mentioned. And so, this may be something that is happening more of more of an internal level for you, Cancer, that maybe other people are not noticing. It might be internal things, right, that are going on for you. Okay, Leo, this is happening in your 11th house. And so it's time to sort of let go of some story in terms of your friendship groups, your associations, organizations, networks that you're involved in, and also about your vision for the future. What story have you been telling yourself? What story has been playing out for you that maybe being triggered around the time of the full moon, because it's triggering you to take notice and to say it's time to close the book on that and to start anew, in some manner, when it comes to those 11th house things, right, that I just mentioned. So, good luck, Leo, with that. And, try to just be mindful and patient during this time. Okay, moving on to Virgo. Virgo, this for you is happening in your 10th house. And so it's like this career reset almost. Or it could have to do with your public reputation, your status, your relationship to authority, which can also have to do with, which traditionally thought of as, the authority in the family unit, the father generally, traditionally, but it could be some authority figure, right? So what story has gone on? What story, it's just like, it's been written and written and written, and it's time to end that story and begin a new story in that 10th house area of your public reputation, your career ambitions, and all of the stuff that I mentioned, right? And so for you, is there something like maybe your current career needs to be, it's time to put it to bed and begin a new career in general. Or maybe it's some relationship that you've had with your father, or relationship to authority in general that's been going on. And this story's been playing out and playing out and playing out. And it's finally time to just close the book on it and let it go. And, start a new story there. Okay, Libra, this is happening for you in your 9th house. And so this is the house of your philosophical outlook, right? And your belief system. It can have to do with religious dogma too. It can have to do with foreign interests and foreign travel, and that those things we learn from foreign cultures. Can have to do with justice. It can have to do with teaching and learning, right? This is often known as the house of higher education. And so Libra, are you up for examining any triggers that happen for you in that area of life? What stories have you been really attached to here? What stories have been playing out for you that it's time to let go of now? Are you ready for new adventures, right? The 9th house is the house of Sagittarius. It's the house of adventure. Are you ready for new adventures in this area of life? And to, you know, to stop telling yourself the old story, or to stop living out the old story and start preparing yourself for the new in that area of life. Okay, Libra, can very much be about a shift in perspective for you here. All right, Scorpio, this is happening in your 8th house. This is all about your intimate connections, Scorpio, and your shared resources. This is about transformation. It's about power and control dynamics. It can be about, your compulsions and obsessions. It can have to do with your deep psyche. So where are you willing to let go of an old story here, that you've been hanging on to in this area of your life for far too long, and to begin anew somehow in this area? Have you been, I don't know, maybe hanging on to a story about how you know, always have to rely on others for your um for your, say, financial well-being, or maybe you've had a certain story going on, playing out in terms of your relationship to power dynamics, and it's time now to let that go and to move on. Those are just some examples. Okay, and I'm going to move on to Sagittarius now. And Sag, this is happening for you in your 7th house. So Sag, this is about your one-to-one partnerships, right? Your one-to-one close personal relationships. And this includes, as you've heard me say, marriages or kind of common law partnerships, just close personal relationships. It can be business partnerships, or really close friendships as well, or rivalries that you have with somebody else, another person. So, is it time to close the book on a particular relationship once and for all, right? Or perhaps to to let go of the stories you're telling yourself about a certain relationship, right? Don't forget that Gemini is a very mental sign associated with our thinking. So, have you been thinking about a certain relationship in a particular way and you've been really attached to this way of thinking about it? And now it's time to close the book on that and to start thinking about it in a whole new way, or maybe just close the book on a relationship. You know, is it time to bury the hatchet maybe with a rival and to let that go and to move on? So those are just some examples of how that could play out for you, Sag, with this full moon. Moving on to Capricorn. Capricorn, this is happening in your 6th house. So this is all about your daily routine and the relationship you have with your health and wellness, right? Those routines and or health and wellness in general. It's about how we are in service on the day to day to others. And so maybe you've spent a long time in a particular routine, daily routine, thinking that this is the way it has to be, right? You've been going at this with blinders on, telling yourself this story about this is the way it has to be. And now it's time to kind of wake up. Maybe something triggers you to kind of wake up and go, actually, I'm done with this story. And I'd really like to close the book on this and think about this in a whole new way and move on to something new, right? So, there's an opportunity for that to happen for you here, Capricorn, in that area of life. Okay, moving on to Aquarius. This is happening in your 5th house. And this is about children, your relationship to children, children you have, children you work with, your inner child, your creativity, right? Your creative self-expression, your hobbies and the pleasures in life. Something that came to mind for me here when I was thinking about this is like maybe you've been in this story, you're telling yourself this story about, how you're never going to be a parent, right? That's just not for you for whatever reason. And maybe suddenly something's triggering you and you're shifting your thoughts about that. Maybe you're ready to let go of that story and entertain the thought of a new story in that area, right? Maybe you've always told yourself that your creative hobbies aren't something you could make a career out of. And now it's time to let go of that internal dialogue, of that story, and to shift your thinking about that. So those are just some examples, Aquarius, of how that could play out for you, right? It's about questioning, is what I've been telling myself, is the story that's been playing out for me really true? And that goes for all signs in all these areas of life. Okay, moving on to Pisces. Pisces, this is happening for you in the area of life that has to do with your family and your home and the place of living and your emotional security and the relationship to the mother figure as well. Right? The archetype of mother. So it's your 4th house. So what story have you been living out or telling yourself in regards to this area of life, right? Maybe it's about never being able to own your own home, let's say. And you've been telling yourself that, and that's the story that's been playing out for you. And now suddenly, you're being triggered to shift that perspective and to close the book on that story, right? And start writing a new one. And that's just one example. Can you feel a new story that wants to be written when it comes to these 4th house matters for you, Pisces? All right, next is Aries. And Aries, this has to do with your thoughts, communications. It's the natural house of Gemini, right? And where Mercury is comfortable. It has to do with your siblings, your peers, your daily interactions, and your immediate environment. So what have you been telling yourself, or what story has been playing out for you in terms of how you communicate? And particularly maybe in that, those daily communications with those people in your immediate environment. What inner dialogue cycles around in your head, right? What are the quality of your interactions? Is there something that it's time to let go of there, right? Is there some new story that wants to be told in that area of your life? And are you ready to do that, Aries? So, you know, food for thought, definitely. And last but not least, Taurus. This is happening in your money sector, so the second house. So this has to do with your resources, what you value, your relationship to your self-worth, the talents that you use to make a secure place in the world for yourself, right? So what story have you been living out in terms of your relationship to money and resources and values, Taurus? What about that old story just seems like it's not true anymore, and you're ready to close the book and start a new one in that area of life? So that's all 12 signs, and I wish you so much, you know, inner peace and good luck with this reset and with letting go of that old story and starting the new one in whatever area of life that is for you. Okay, take care, everybody, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.